I'm Kay McClagan, Pioneer Rep from Mitchell, Ontario, and this is the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast.
Thanks, Kay, and welcome to the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast. My name's Andrew Campbell, and I hope from the last episode on farm management, it still has you thinking about what you could do around your farm to find either a little more income or cut a few expenses. And while some of that could be low-hanging fruit, others may be easier to find with a little help from technology. After all, there are all kinds of places for you to invest in technology with the hopes that you'll be able to find a few efficiencies around the farm. The challenge, at least for me, is with so many options, what types of tech are going to give you your best bang for your buck? As we like to do here, we've got several guests ready to visit with, each with a few different ideas and hopefully some new innovations to think about. Let's open things up with someone who has innovation right in his title. He's no stranger to many in Ontario agriculture, as he works for the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. Ian McDonald is the Crop Innovations Specialist for the province, and we really appreciate him joining us. Ian, let's start from the beginning and get an idea from you that when a grower is looking to expand on the technology they have around their farm, where do they start?
I guess two things. One is where they probably have the most comfort, because that's one of the problems with taking on new technology is the anxiety that sometimes it creates. And the second area is where they have a definite problem that they need solved, and through either their own research or working with consultants or other advisors can find solutions they can invest in.
Now, you mentioned that anxiety as part of it, and that's certainly one that, I've seen and talked to different farmers about. Is that one of those big holdups that you see a lot of farmers with? Is it cost? I mean, I just wonder, when you see such this range out there that exists from those that are completely in depth in all of this all the time to ones that don't have anything, what is that big difference?
To be honest with you, I think it's the headspace and what people are comfortable with. They're not afraid to invest. Look at all of the investment in new combines and sprayers and tractors and planters. So they're happy to invest, but then do they take it to the next level of optimizing that investment? Like, I've been surprised by the somewhat apprehension about, spending the next amount of money on entire inflation system to optimize that fancy new sprayer you spent $600,000 or $700,000 on.
Well, that's actually what I'd love to talk about next, because, as you mentioned, there's those technology things that I think a lot, dream of or think of or want to invest in. And, it's the tractor with all the bells and whistles, that sprayer, that combine. It's the big, shiny, fancy things. And certainly that's part of what we're talking about technology. But can you give me a rundown? What else comes to your mind when you think of technology and try to point farmers in a direction that says, at least you should consider some of these things too?
Well, there's a tremendous amount of talk about precision agriculture and digital agriculture, and what does that bring to the individual producer. And, again, this is where it gets confusing and conflicting, because, again, it's data overload that people are intimidated by, and I'm intimidated by it just like anybody else. But it's what can come out of that if you align with the right equipment and the right people to help you. One thing that I like about precision agriculture and variable rate is, does it allow profitability mapping that absolutely shows us where the profit and loss geography is in our fields? To me, that's one of the best ways to look at how to enhance management and increase the bottom line.
Now, you mentioned a little earlier about that kind of central inflation system as being one of those pieces of technology. Can maybe, for those that aren't quite as familiar with what a system like that is doing and where that profit potential is, can you kind of give me a rundown in terms of where your research finds that works?
So we've done a lot of work in the compaction area, mostly demonstration, not a lot of, real absolute research. But there's many things that you can do, adjusting tire types, buying better technology tires, loading equipment properly, having the patience to go out when the soil conditions are right, etc. But oftentimes we can't. Things like sprayers and haying equipment, it needs to go when it needs to go. It can't wait for the ground to dry up. And so how do you optimize that? And the thing is that these implements are heavy. So if they run down the road, they have a tremendous amount of weight, and you've got speed and friction and heat. So they have to run at high tire pressure. You put that into the field, and that is harmful to that ecosystem in our soils. And so by being able to lower the tire pressures significantly, you really change the footprint on the ground, spread that weight out, and really reduce the potential for compaction. So you can do that manually, but who's going to do that manually on a great big manure tanker with 12,900 tires on it, right? And so these central tire inflation systems automate the ability to do that. And to me, that's just a no-brainer investment to enhance the productivity of the farm.
That one sounds like, we're just kind of on the cusp of seeing, maybe more and more of it actually being utilized on the farm. What are some other tools that you find grain growers are, we're just on the cusp of, or, some of those early adopter producers are just starting to use that are also finding some real benefit?
Everybody sort of comes to drones and, do I buy a drone and make my farm more viable and more robust in using a drone? Drones are great. They have their place. Any farmer that's also a pilot that you talk to and ask how they do their scouting, they would say they get up in their airplane first to see the patches of the field where they got to spend their time, because when you're sitting at the roadside looking in, you really don't see that. So where do you spend your valuable time in scouting? And as fields get bigger and bigger, it's harder to find those spots. And so if you can take that overhead view, that works great. Now, drones have a place, but they still take a lot of management in terms of somebody flying it, somebody taking the data and interpreting it. I think we're going to see a big change in that over the next couple of years or next few years as we start to get high resolution satellite photography being available to us, and use that to enhance our scouting ability.
Now, you said, and this is a perfect segue into the next conversation I want to have in terms of that data, that, you need somebody there to interpret all of that information. And, certainly from what I've seen with technology is just the sheer volume of data that's coming from all sorts of pieces of technology at us. Do you think farmers are using that data to their full potential, or how can growers do a little better job at actually utilizing that information?
So I think we can access all kinds of data, and we see people doing that and using it. I think we need to do two things. We need to use the right data. So it has to be collected in a quality environment, has to be managed well so it's not lost or corrupted, and it has to be interpreted well. And that, to me, is one of the fundamental problems, because we're still dealing with software technology that's relatively complex and not super user friendly. Now, there are people out there, and they tend to be left-brained people that are more like the engineering types that type of thing just clicks with. But left-brained people are the minority in our community, and so there's less of us that have that sort of innate ability to do that just off the cuff. And to me, it's finding those people, and they're out there now as agriculture consultants, either independently or with different supply businesses and stuff that know how to work with that data and can help you interpret it. Because no sense having data and collecting it and storing it, etc., if you can't take actionable management decisions on it.
Now, you've mentioned that a few times about pulling in those resources or pulling in those people to help you manage that data. Is it one of those things that growers need to be a little more open to doing that in order to boost that profitability down the road?
I absolutely think so. The farm of today is not the farm of dad or grandpa, where you sort of were the jack of all trades. This stuff is complex. It's moving at you quickly. It's changing almost overnight. And so it's hard to keep up with that. And, so many businesses in other areas of the business have hired in expertise to support their business, create these partnerships. And I think we need to do and be open to more of that within crop agriculture.
So then just to wrap up here, Ian, if we look kind of, into a crystal ball and look into the future, some of the future, technology we can kind of envision if we look at, certain, trade shows and all that kind of stuff. But I'm wondering from your view is where is the grain industry going here in terms of, some of the other advancements that are coming? And I'm, off the top of my head, you start thinking about robotics and even more automation versus just straight auto steer, even more data. What is coming next?
2 years ago at Agritechnica, there were a bunch of Ontario farmers that went over and I had them come back and talk at the Farm Smart Ag conference about what they saw and what they learned and what interested them. And robotics was definitely on the list of that. And robotics is an interesting thing because robotics is not only the automation aspect, but it's a significant scale change in the piece of equipment that's going to be in the field. And so instead of having a 12, 16, 24, 36-row planter, you're going to have a whole bunch of little robots running around putting seed in the ground. And we have it now. Fendt has a system that they're testing called Xavier. And you just have these swarms of little robots running around doing all that seeding and telling the computer exactly the GPS coordinates of where that is, so that then you can go back and weed and fertilize and pest protect those individual plants. So to me, the future is as big as the farms are, as big as the fields are, we're going to see management happening in a much smaller geography, even down to single plants. And I can't tell you when that's going to happen, but I'm absolutely convinced it is going to happen.
Ian, thanks very much for the time today.
You're most welcome.
So, robots in the long term, tools like tire inflation systems in the short term to find the efficiencies. It certainly brings a lot of options and ideas to mind. But don't think those are your only options. The next person we want to bring in comes to us from Iowa. Anthony Lackore is the area digital leader for Corteva, covering the western U.S. Anthony, I think the best bet here would be for you to tell us a bit about what that title means.
Hey, Andrew, it's a pleasure to be on here today. I've been with Corteva about 10 years in many different aspects of our business, ultimately helping farmers get to a point where they can leverage a lot of these precision agronomy technologies to help them better their farm operations.
When you've got digital in your title, I mean, we're already starting off with something that just yells technology at what you're dealing with daily. When we were sitting down to think about this episode, one of the big questions we wanted to try to answer was, where does a grower start to think about their technology plan for their farm? So why don't we start there? How should a grower think about this stuff?
That's a great point, because in today's age, digital is probably one of the most overused buzzwords within the industry. And it's super important that we have to define that. And I go back and liken digital as some of the basic fundamental aspects of farming and farm business management that we've been doing for over 50 years. It's the same agronomy that we've been managing. And now what we have is tools and technologies and solutions to help us drive some of those faster decisions than what we've ever done before. And as we look at that starting point, it's super important to always think with the end in mind. Starting with that end in mind really helps us navigate to leverage a lot of this information and technology to get from that starting point to that finish line and really drive success in helping us make those better decisions.
Okay, then if we're going to think about having that end in mind, I've got a couple of areas I'd like to cover with you, and maybe you could bring it back to that, starting with field operations data, because I think that for a lot of growers, they've invested into it. We have a lot of information now because of it. How can a grower better utilize that field data?
As I've been talking with farmers for the past 5, 6, 7 years, it's been amazing to hear the feedback of, I've been collecting yield data since 1999, and I've never actually put forth that information to make better decisions. And so really, when we look at the fundamentals of how can we leverage that data that comes from the machine, two really key areas that I always like to think about and use as a starting point is the as planted data from the planter. So that information collecting what hybrid is in the planter, planting date, seeding rates, other attributes from the planter. And then on the backside, having that yield data, and I always like to go back to high quality yield data and the importance of having that post calibrated and cleaned up. By having just those two sets of information alone, we now have some of the capabilities through some of our technologies where we can start answering some of those key questions of what was the best planting date on my farm. We can look at trends to see, was early April or late May the best time to plant, looking at yield by planting date. No different than when we look at answering some of those key questions, such as what's that optimal harvest moisture? We get that question a lot where maybe I start harvesting seed corn at 25% moisture, all the way down to 15% moisture. And I want to start investigating this concept we've often heard of phantom yield loss. Is that real? Do I need to be optimizing 22% moisture to harvest corn versus 15%? And what is my return on investment?
So now we've got some more uses out of that data. The other piece I want to talk about comes from what I saw a few years ago when a lot of farmers picked up drone technology. Maybe it was a fancy drone, maybe it was something more basic, but they bought it, flew it around a few times, and then a lot of the drones that I saw went into a closet and don't really come out very much anymore. Can you talk about that aerial technology from your point of view and maybe layer in with that new field imagery maps we're getting from even higher up where we might be able to take advantage of some of this information from the sky?
That's a great point, because 5 years ago, when we looked at leveraging drone technology, it was just a pretty picture. It replaced a lot of those Century Family Farm photos that we used to get from the aerial plane. And now we've reached a point where between crop health imagery via satellites, as well as drone technology, we can really manage our crop in season live on the go. Some of the technology that we're leveraging through satellites is we have the ability to capture crop health imagery on any given field, whether it's corn, soybeans, any crop, 5 to 6 to 7 times per week, where we have 3-meter resolution that gives us indication of variability within that field. And that's powerful, because if we're looking across someone who has maybe 10, 15, 20, 50 different fields, with that crop health imagery, we can run analytics that allow us to understand which fields are the ones that are the most variable. And I should prioritize needing to go scout or get boots on the ground. And so that technology just via satellites is great, because it's very low barrier to entry, and that all I have to have is a field boundary. I don't have special hardware or equipment. Those satellites are running around frequently enough where we can get that imagery, and it gives that nice 30,000-foot view.
I've also heard of growers that may use that imagery data to help make some prescriptions on the farm for variable rate nitrogen, which brings me to the third piece to chat with you about, and that's fertility, partly because Chris talked a lot about it in our last episode. You just heard Ian talk about the idea of managing things from a profit per acre perspective instead of always yield per acre. So I'm wondering, given the expense that fertilizers can be, are there any new tools out there today, or even coming soon, that might be able to help us manage the expense of fertility?
I think some of these new technologies have helped open our eyes and just start asking the question why. And I look at many fields, even on our own farming operation, where we've got variability from sandy loams to silty clay loams within the same field, where on those silty clay loams, we may have a yield goal of 240 bushels per acre looking at corn. And on the sandy loams, we actually may only have a yield potential of 180. But historically, we've been putting down 220 pounds of nitrogen across that entire field at the same rate. And so by having information such as crop health imagery, to good soil sample and fertility data, to even something as simple as working with my crop consultant or my seed representative to have good scouting information and notes back in my hands, I can now ask the question, well, why are we managing that north half of the field with 180 bushel potential the exact same as the south half when we've got a 60 bushel spread? And now we have a lot of technology that allows us to just kind of open up our eyes and ask that question of, well, we've done that for the last 30 years, but is that the same way we need to manage it moving forward? A lot of this information is coming to our fingertips, and now we can start leveraging that where, okay, maybe we could put in some trials and start understanding, are there better ways to manage that variability that we have with any given field that we're farming.
Then finally, Anthony, is there something that takes the edge off for those growers that are starting to think maybe they need to have a better plan for using some of these new technologies around the farm?
As we've worked with many progressive growers across the North America and even globally within this space of digital agronomy, everyone's at various places. Some people have been on the progressive forefront doing everything we just talked about for 10 years, and they're way ahead of even what I just talked through with this opportunity. There's others where, hey, we're maybe in the camp where we've been collecting this data, but we've never actually put it to use. My recommendation is always surround yourself with a good team that can help you leverage that to the fullest extent. So whether that be working with your seed supplier or a crop consultant, leverage that team that you have to help you ask those questions and get to a point where you're putting in a plan to go work towards answering that. And having people are going to be absolutely fundamental as we continue this journey within digital agronomy. I've always said digital will not replace people, but it will replace those people who don't adopt. And that's where it's important to surround yourself with a good team that you can trust, that can help you consult and answer those questions and really gear towards making the best decisions for your farm as we look at this journey of leveraging digital to better our farms for the future ahead.
Thanks, Anthony, for today.
Thanks, Andrew. It was a pleasure.
Next, to bring this to the farm level, and we're heading to Eastern Ontario to the Chesterville area to do that. We've got Brent Vanden Bosch. Brent, thanks for jumping on our podcast today. Maybe you can start things by giving us an idea of what your operation looks like.
We're growing corn, soybeans, and some fall wheat. I farm with my brother and my son, and we also own a grain elevator operation that's separate from the farm. So everybody's sort of got their own little area that they work on, and it's working great.
Now, we are talking new technology, so when I say that, what comes to the top of your mind with the things that you guys are doing around your farm?
We're using the Granular Insights program. We're using Granular Business, Corteva Fields. We're trying to adapt all the technology into the business. We also have been part of a farmer-run RTK group that's been going for probably about 12 years. There's 6 of us involved there, that we've got a big area covered. We try to use everything.
It sounds like a pile of points of data coming into you guys by the time you look at those maps and what you're putting into Granular. How do you try to manage all those pieces into something that you can actually make decisions with?
So we try to use programs that work with each other. A lot of the data is downloaded through John Deere Map or John Deere Ops Center, which automatically it's hooked with our Granular Insights, Granular Business, Corteva. So all the data gets into all those programs so that you're not having to move it from one to another, and then all of a sudden this program doesn't talk to this one. So we try to get it all so it'll all end up in the same area or into the same programs that we can sit down. Anybody can sit down and look at it and say, okay, yeah, this all makes sense. And just trying to get stuff that works or programs that work with each other to save a lot of hassle.
Well, because that hassle, I think, is where, from the growers that I talk to, is that struggle in trying to, it's great to have all this data, but at the end of the day, if it's too complicated to go actually use it or find something out, you're just not going to end up doing anything with it. Did you guys find that too?
Yeah, we actually started yield mapping back in 1997. We bought our first John Deere combine and had the yield monitor on it, recording data. But the first bunch of years, we didn't do much with it. And then Pioneer started downloading our yield maps into their systems. So that is where we are. They're collecting data, and then we use their Corteva Fields program to create our prescriptions for both variable rating corn and soybeans. So that has given us lots of data. We will do other things like are actually doing some swap mapping this year with Paul Sullivan, where anything that we feel. We've done variable rate fertilizer. So we're getting there.
When you talk about that stuff, Brent, I think, You know, when you talk about new technology or you see new technology, a lot of people think, you know, kind of big shiny toys or, you know, the hardware side of things. You know, clearly having a bit of a plan for the software is something that, you know, is kind of the step that you guys are taking now. When you start piecing that together, and you did mention, you know, trying to use software that actually can talk to each other and utilize everything, does it make a difference? Have you guys seen a difference over the last few years in trying to implement some of this stuff with that software?
Yeah, when we started to variable rate seeding, that was an instant saving right there, because we were pushing our seed rates up to about 35,000 when we started to variable rate our seeding. We're averaging probably 33.5, and we installed check blocks to check to make sure the prescriptions are correct. We put higher populations into the lower population areas to check to make sure we're not giving up yield, and do the same in the lower population trials. And it's a seed saving right off the bat.
Then in terms of, you know, using a program like Granular or Corteva Field or, you know, any of those types of things, give growers an idea who maybe aren't quite as familiar with it. What type of information are you putting in, and what type of information are you getting back out from it?
So Granular Business, you create a crop plan. You then take and assign that to the fields that you're growing that crop into, put all your tillage practices in, your planting, what you're going to plant, variety, what you're going to spray with it, everything that you're going to do there. Then you can print out what's really cool is you can print out almost a shopping list, Andrew, where it tells you how much of each chemical you're going to require, each fertilizer. Send that off to your supplier. They can price it.
So we've got all the data inputted, but at what point are you pulling information out? Or even how does having the software side lined up in your favor impact your bottom line?
So with the Granular Business, you enter in your sales contracts every time you sell corn, soybeans, fall wheat, straw, whatever you're selling. You input that into the system. It creates a break-even price for you. So as you're entering your sales in, it tells you where you are, how much you've got left to sell on your expected yields. You can play with that. You can adjust your prices, your yield. So it becomes quite interesting to see, well, if I get this yield, well, this is where I'm going to be at. Or if I do this procedure or trial, well, it's going to cost me this, and what's that going to affect my return on investment? There's a lot that you can play with in there. You can create all types of reports that you want. Our year end is in the middle of the summer, so we need a in-crop field inventory. I just create that for our accountant and hand it off to her. She's all nice and she's happy, and it gives her, if she has questions, then she just calls me and say, well, what's this and what's that? And we can discuss it. So it becomes very easy for that.
Brent, I really appreciate you walking us through your experience and having this conversation about the software side of new technology coming at growers. So thanks very much for it.
Quite welcome, Andrew, anytime.
I certainly hope that with all those tidbits, whether you're deep in the world of new technology or just getting a feel for it, Ian, Anthony, and Brent were able to provide at least a few new ideas. That is it for today. On our next episode, we're going to stick with the subject of new and emerging, but this time from the labs and the test plots. It's conversations about research and development and how new varieties and hybrids get to you. That's next time. On behalf of the entire Pioneer team, thank you so much for listening to the Pioneer Made to Grow podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, we hope you'll recommend us to a friend or even rate us on your preferred podcast platform. You can also get in touch on Twitter at Pioneer Seeds CA or my handle, Fresh Air Farmer. And for more info or advice, talk to your local Pioneer rep or visit pioneer.com.